Hello, welcome back to the Nook. I'm Daniel, and today I'll be reviewing this book here, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. So just look at this beautiful cover, and it's got these end paper here. That's just beautiful. So this is a classic I had never read before. There were three Bronte sisters writing in the 1800s. There was Emily Bronte, Charlotte Bronte, and Anne Bronte. And I believe Emily only wrote Wuthering Heights. She died very young. She died when she was like in her 30s. I don't know how old the other ones were, but the other Brontes wrote quite a few other books. And I do also have Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, which I will be reading and reviewing on the channel probably pretty soon. So honestly, with Wuthering Heights, I had a friend who also likes classics, and he read Wuthering Heights and was telling me about it, and he really enjoyed it. So sometime recently, a couple months ago, I was in a bookstore. There was a Black Friday sale, and I was able to pick up that edition of Wuthering Heights. I just thought it looked really nice. It was on sale. I got a good price for it, and I finally decided to read it. And honestly, I loved it. I think it was a great classic. I wasn't so sure what I'd think because it's known to be gothic, kind of dark, not exactly happy. And what I can say about it, spoiler free, is one of the main themes, it seems to be the relationships, especially the romantic ones, are very toxic. So Wuthering Heights is full of these very toxic relationships where there's not a whole lot of love going on. There's no back description, so I'll try to tell you as much about it as I can off the top of my head. I read this at least a month ago. Um, Basically, it starts out with this man named Mr. Lockwood, I believe. I'll just flip back. I'm sorry, I can't remember what his name. I think it was Mr. Lockwood. Yes, Mr. Lockwood. And he comes into this house and he meets Mr. Heathcliff. And there's also a servant named Nellie. And basically, it starts off with Mr. Lockwood meeting Mr. Heathcliff and thinking, oh, he's a very interesting man, kind of seems angry or weird, doesn't know what to think of him. And he kind of gets, I think he gets a bad, like he stays with Mr. Heathcliff, but it's not a very nice arrangement. Mr. Heathcliff seems kind of like not a good host, and he's kind of wondering what's going on. And he meets a young lady. He's trying to figure out what's going on with this young lady. Eventually, the rest of the story ends up being Nellie, this housekeeper, telling Mr. Lockwood Mr. Heathcliff's history and of all these relationships. So there's a bunch of other characters, a couple of female characters, and there's characters that die. There's relationships that don't work out. And like I said, it's very toxic, a lot of toxic relationships. But I will say, without spoiling anything, it does have a somewhat hopeful and happy ending. It's not very much a tragedy, even though there is some death and there is some sadness. I will say I really enjoyed it. The writing was really good. Honestly, her prose is really good prose. So I highly enjoyed the writing style. And even though it was about so many toxic relationships, I always wanted to find out what was going to happen next. It was always interesting to me. And so basically, Mr. Lockwood was kind of in the beginning, and then it ends up just being Nellie telling her story, working for Mr. Heathcliff and for these others. And yeah, so there's all sorts of relationships that happen. I know Heathcliff was in love with one person, but she married someone else. And then he married someone else, but he didn't love her. It's very convoluted. So if you're not into classics that are a little more dark and have more toxic relationships, I feel like maybe this wouldn't be for you. If you prefer something more cheerful, a lot of the Charles Dickens books would be more up your alley, although there are some dark Dickens books as well. So, I mean, overall, I'm glad I got this nice edition. I'm sure I'll read it again sometime. And I agree with my friend that it was a very good book, and I really enjoyed it. The themes that are there, they definitely focus on characters that are kind of flawed. There's no real good guys. I mean, maybe Mr. Lockwood is slightly good. You just don't get much of Mr. Lockwood's character. It's in the first person with him, but then it's in the first person with Nellie kind of telling her story. And then you do go back to Mr. Lockwood and kind of his experience, and he gets to see something without really spoiling it. It's like he gets to see a relationship that's actually positive that came out of all of the chaos and the darkness. You get to see like I'm being very vague here because there's so much to this story that if I told you about these characters' names and the plot points, it would be a complete spoiler. So I have to keep it very vague, but I will say there was a really solid relationship in it that was probably the best, most non-toxic relationship in the whole story. And even then, it was kind of weird. So yeah, it's quite the story. I feel like I'll have more to talk about with Jane Eyre because this story, Wuthering Heights, I read it so long ago. It's been, I mean, only really a month, maybe even just a few weeks, but it stuck with me. But there's just the plot in Wuthering Heights was just so there's just so much going on. It's hard to talk about spoiler free. But if this does interest you, if you want to read a kind of darker story with some interesting character dynamics, and I mean the character development is really good. And I really enjoyed Nellie's story that she told to Mr. Lockwood. I really enjoyed the character work that was there. So honestly, if that sounds up your alley, I would recommend it. And when I say dark, it's not really like brutal. It's not like some of the grim dark fantasy you could read. It's dark without being brutal. It's dark just in that the characters are kind of flawed and morally gray. Um, but it's not like as gothic as some. Like I think Jane Eyre, I've seen the movie Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte is definitely more dark in that it's more intense. But yeah, if that sounds like a book you'd like, I recommend it. It was really well written. I enjoyed it. It had a good ending. And I mean, that's about all I can say. This was kind of a really vague review, but I hope you liked it. Please leave a comment if you're interested in this book. And remember to like and subscribe. And remember, you're always welcome at the Nook. Bye.